When my own sister laughed and told our relatives that I had no money left, I smiled instead of explaining, because by then I had learned that silence can protect you better than truth. It happened on a rainy afternoon, inside our old family home, the one where every wall held memories of shared meals and quiet fights. We were gathered around the dining table for a small family event. Nothing fancy, just tea, snacks, and familiar faces. Someone casually asked about my work, and before I could answer, my sister waved her hand and said, "Don't bother asking him, he's struggling, barely getting by." A few people chuckled softly. Others looked at me with pity. I lowered my eyes and stirred my tea slowly. I did not correct her. I did not feel angry. I felt tired. For years, my family had decided who I was without asking. The quiet one. The unlucky one. The man who never really made it. They spoke about me like I was not sitting right there. And maybe in their minds I really was. I had stopped living in their expectations a long time ago. That afternoon, the rain tapped against the windows and the room smelled of old wood and cardamom tea. As they talked about jobs, expenses, and rising prices, my name became an example of what not to be. "At least my son is stable," someone said. "He has a future." I nodded politely, my hands folded in my lap. I remembered when I used to argue, used to defend myself, used to explain late nights and early mornings. It never helped, so I stopped. My story was never loud enough for them. After that day, the story spread. At weddings, at funerals, at casual visits, people spoke about me with that same tone. Poor guy. He never recovered. Life was not kind to him. Even my parents looked at me with quiet worry, slipping small amounts of money into my hand when no one was watching. I always thanked them and gave it back later, unnoticed. What they did not know was that my life had moved into a different shape. One they could not recognize. I lived simply. I wore old clothes, I drove a modest car, I rented a small apartment with plain furniture and quiet evenings. To them, these were signs of failure. To me, they were choices. Every morning, I woke before sunrise. I made my coffee in silence. I sat by the window and watched the city wake up. And then I went to work. Not the kind of work that impresses at family gatherings. No titles worth mentioning. No stories that fit into short conversations. Just steady, meaningful work that mattered to people who never spoke my name in public. Years earlier, I had promised myself something after one painful argument at that same family table. My brother had said, "You think too much. If you were successful, we would know." That sentence stayed with me. That night, I stood alone in the kitchen, the house quiet, and realized something important. Some success grows best in silence. So I chose a different path. I stopped asking for approval. I stopped explaining my choices. I stopped measuring my life by their reactions. I worked quietly with organizations that helped children, hospitals, and community centers. I never put my name on banners. I never attended events. I asked for one thing only: anonymity. It felt safer that way. Cleaner. I did not do it to prove anyone wrong. I did it because it felt right. Giving quietly healed something inside me that defending myself never could. But my family never saw that side of me. To them, I was still the man who had fallen behind. When invitations came, I sat at the edge of rooms. When photos were taken, I stood in the back. When decisions were discussed, my opinion was not requested. And slowly, I became used to that place. Until the day the invitation arrived. A thick envelope. Clean paper, formal words. It was for a public charity event in the city center. A large annual fundraiser for a children's hospital. My family was excited. They talked about who would attend, what they would wear, and who might be seen there. No one asked if I was going. My sister joked, "Tickets are expensive anyway." I smiled and said nothing. I already had a seat, not at a table, but somewhere brighter, somewhere honest. I did not tell them. I did not plan to. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain again, I wondered how it would feel to be seen differently. Not admired, just understood. But then I let the thought go, because this was not about revenge. It was about truth, and truth has its own timing. I closed my eyes and slept peacefully, unaware that soon my name would appear where they never expected it to be. In light, not to shame them, not to embarrass them, but to finally let silence speak for me. The weeks leading up to the charity event passed quietly, the same way my days usually did, steady and uneventful on the surface, yet full of small moments that mattered deeply to me. I continued my routine without change. Early mornings. Simple meals. Long hours of focused work. In my small kitchen, I often cooked alone, the sound of the stove and the ticking clock keeping me company. Sometimes I thought about my family, about how easily they spoke about my life without knowing it. I did not blame them anymore. People fill silence with their own stories, and I had given them plenty of silence. One afternoon, my mother called and asked if I needed anything. Her voice carried concern, the kind that never fully leaves a parent's heart. I told her I was fine. She paused, then said softly, "Your sister mentioned that things are still hard for you." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. I told her again that I was fine. We changed the subject. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, wondering when care turns into doubt, and how love sometimes hurts without meaning to. At work, I reviewed reports and budgets not for profit but for impact. Numbers told stories most people never heard. How many beds were filled? How many treatments were delayed? How many children waited quietly for help? I remembered my own childhood, the nights my parents whispered about bills, the times help arrived from strangers whose names we never knew. That memory shaped me. It reminded me why I stayed hidden, because the work was never about me. As the event drew closer, emails began to arrive, confirmations, seating arrangements. A final note explaining that major donors would be acknowledged publicly unless they requested otherwise. I stared at that line longer than the rest. I had always chosen otherwise. Always asked to remain unnamed. That day, for the first time, I hesitated. Not because I wanted attention, but because I felt tired of being misunderstood by the people who mattered most to me. I thought about family gatherings, about lowered voices, about pitying looks, about my parents worrying in silence. And I wondered if staying invisible was protecting me, or if it was keeping a wall between us that no one knew how to remove. I did not decide right away. That evening, my sister sent a message in the family group chat, talking about the event again. "This fundraiser is very high class," she wrote. "Important people only." A few laughing emojis followed. No one tagged me. No one asked if I wanted to come. I read the message and placed my phone face down on the table. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, not anger, just a quiet sadness. That night, I walked through the city after dinner, the air cool, the streets busy with strangers who knew nothing about me and expected nothing from me. I stopped near a small park and sat on a bench watching children play under dim lights. Their laughter echoed softly. I thought about the hospital the event was supporting, about the children inside those walls, about how little they cared about names or status. They cared about relief, about comfort, about kindness. When I returned home, I opened my laptop and wrote a short email. I confirmed my attendance. And for the first time, I did not check the box requesting anonymity. My finger hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I sent it. I felt a mix of fear and calm wash over me. Not because I planned to reveal anything to my family, but because I was finally allowing the truth to exist in the open, even if only briefly. The days after that felt heavier. Every family conversation carried a hidden tension I could feel but not explain. My brother complained about work. My sister talked about expenses. Someone joked again about my situation, about how I always kept things simple because I had no choice. I smiled and nodded, my answers short. Inside, I reminded myself why I had chosen this moment. Not to correct them, not to teach them a lesson, but to release myself from the weight of being constantly misjudged. The night before the event, I ironed my only dark suit. It was old but clean. I placed it carefully on the chair and sat on my bed, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside my window. I did not feel excited, I felt reflective. I thought about how strange it is that people who share your blood can feel so distant while strangers can understand you without words. I wondered what would happen tomorrow. Would my family be there? Would they notice? Would they care? Or would everything stay the same? I did not know. And for once, I allowed myself to accept that not knowing was okay, because some truths do not need to be forced. They arrive when the space is ready. As I turned off the light and lay down, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. No matter what happened the next day, I had lived honestly. And that was enough. The evening of the charity event arrived quietly, without drama, the way important moments often do. And as I stood in front of my mirror adjusting my tie, I reminded myself to breathe slowly and stay present. The city center was bright when I arrived, the building lit with soft golden lights that reflected off the glass doors. People stepped out of cars in elegant clothes, their voices low and polite, their movements careful, as if the space itself demanded respect. I entered alone and gave my name at the desk. The woman smiled, checked a list, and nodded with a warmth that felt personal. She handed me a small card and said, "Thank you for being here." Nothing more, no questions, no assumptions. Inside, the hall was large and calm, filled with gentle music and quiet conversations. Round tables were set with white cloths and simple centerpieces. Screens on the walls showed images of the hospital, children drawing, nurses holding small hands, doctors leaning close to listen. I found my seat near the side, not far from the aisle. It felt natural to choose the edge even here. A few minutes later, I noticed familiar faces across the room. My sister stood near a group of well-dressed guests, laughing a little too loudly. My brother checked his phone. My parents sat together, my mother smoothing her scarf the way she always did when she felt unsure. They had no idea I was there yet. I watched them quietly, feeling a soft ache in my chest, the kind that comes from love mixed with distance. When the program began, the lights dimmed slightly, and a host stepped onto the stage. He spoke gently about the purpose of the evening, about care, hope, and community. Stories were shared. A doctor spoke about a child who had waited too long for treatment. A nurse spoke about holding a hand through the night. I felt tears gather in my eyes, not from sadness alone but from recognition. This was the reason. This was always the reason. Between speeches, servers moved silently, placing water glasses, clearing plates. No one rushed, no one shouted. The room breathed together. Then came the moment I had tried not to imagine too clearly. The host returned and explained that the hospital would like to recognize a few major contributors whose support had changed lives in meaningful ways. Applause followed each name. Faces appeared on the screen. Some people stood and waved modestly. My family clapped along, impressed, whispering comments to each other. I kept my hands folded. I felt my heart beat, steady but strong. I reminded myself again that this was not about being seen. It was about letting truth exist. The host paused, looked at his card, and spoke my name clearly. For a second, the sound felt unreal, like hearing your name spoken in a dream. The screen behind him changed, showing a simple message of thanks and a brief description of the support given over the years. Nothing dramatic, just facts. I stood slowly, my movements calm, and nodded once toward the stage. The applause was polite at first, then grew as people realized I was not a name on a list but a person in the room. I did not wave. I did not smile widely. I simply stood and then sat again. That was enough. Across the room, I saw my sister freeze, her smile fading into confusion. My brother leaned forward, squinting at the screen, then turned to look at me. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father sat very still, his eyes fixed on mine, searching my face for an explanation I had never given. The room returned to quiet as the program continued, but something had shifted, not just around me but inside them. During the break that followed, my parents approached first. My mother's eyes were wet. Touched my arm gently and asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" Her voice was not accusing. It was tired. I looked at her and said softly, "You never asked." She nodded slowly as if the truth settled somewhere deep. My father placed his hand on my shoulder and said nothing, but his grip held more words than he could find. My sister came next, her expression guarded, embarrassed, unsure. She laughed nervously and said, "I didn't know." I met her eyes and replied calmly, "I know." That was all. No blame, no explanation. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of quiet conversations. People spoke to me with new interest, new respect. I listened politely, answered briefly, and often turned the conversation back to the cause. I watched my family move through the room differently now, more careful, more aware. Not proud, thoughtful. As the event came to an end, the lights brightened, and guests began to leave. I stepped outside into the cool night air. I stood there for a moment, feeling the ground beneath my feet, feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth had been spoken, not loudly, not cruelly, but clearly. And as I looked back through the glass doors one last time, I realized that this moment was not an ending. It was an opening. An invitation to see each other again, perhaps for the first time, without stories filling the silence. The days after the event moved more slowly, as if life itself needed time to settle into a new shape, and I noticed that even the smallest family interactions felt different now. My phone rang more often, not with questions about money or worry-filled advice, but with simple check-ins. "Did you eat? Are you resting?" My mother's voice sounded lighter, less tense. My father invited me for a walk, something he had not done in years. We walked side by side in the early morning, the street quiet, birds calling softly from the trees. He did not mention the event at first. We talked about the weather, about old neighbors, about nothing important. Then, as we reached the end of the street, he stopped and said, "I should have listened more." I felt a warmth rise in my chest. I told him it was all right, and I meant it. Because holding on to old misunderstandings only keeps pain alive. My sister changed too, though more slowly. She spoke with less certainty now, asked more questions, and laughed less at her own jokes. One evening she sat with me in the kitchen while I made tea. The kettle steamed between us. She said quietly, "I thought I knew your life." I handed her a cup and replied, "We all think that about each other." She nodded, staring into the tea as if searching for something she had missed. I did not need apologies. Understanding was enough. As weeks passed, the story faded from public memory, as these things always do. Another event replaced it. Another spotlight moved on. But inside our family, something gentle had shifted. Meals felt warmer. Conversations left more space for listening. I noticed my parents no longer slipped money into my hand. They trusted me now, and I trusted them with my silence a little less. I shared small pieces of my life, not to impress but to connect. I still lived simply. I still worked quietly. I still avoided attention. Nothing about my values had changed. Only the weight I carried had grown lighter. One afternoon, I returned to the hospital the fundraiser had supported. I walked through the halls, listening to soft footsteps and distant voices. A nurse recognized me and smiled. A child waved from a bed, holding a drawing. In that moment, I felt complete, not because my family finally knew, but because the work continued, steady and real. That was the true reward. Recognition fades. Impact remains. On a quiet evening at home, I sat by the window as rain fell again, the same sound that had followed so many turning points in my life. I thought about how easily people speak when they do not know, and how easily we believe what we hear when we do not pause to ask. I thought about how many people live misunderstood, not because they are hiding, but because no one takes the time to look beyond the surface. If there is one lesson this journey gave me, it is this: you do not need to prove your worth to anyone who has already decided your value. Live honestly, give quietly, let time do the explaining. Some truths arrive late, but when they do, they bring peace with them. That night, I turned off the light and let the rain sing me to sleep, grateful not for being seen, but for finally being at ease with being known.